So, homicide is probably one of the more like the biggest focus that we have with serial killers. That's where serial crimes, I should say, and that's where most people focus. They get most intrigued by. But there are going to be four different types we're going to talk about. Before we get into that, we'll kind of talk about what serial murder is, what separates serial murder as opposed to mass murder, or even say difference between serial crimes. Like serial rapist could be as few as two victims, whereas serial murder it can be two. A lot of times people consider it three, but I put down there two because it has to be at least two. But in many cases, it's going to be three or more. Have to be separate instances, right? We talk about cooling off period, just like with rapists. And then you have in essence, I'm going to leave that up there for you for a little while. But serial murder killing off periods they tend to be a little bit longer with murder as opposed to rape, like we saw with the power reassurance rapist. So it was raping basically every 1 to 2 weeks. And sadistic, there was a reason. The one thing I didn't explain about sadistic rapists before, the reason why we can't come up with a good definitive cooling off period for all of them is because if you have someone who takes someone to torture them, which is part of sadistic behavior, right? If they have a captive, for lack of better terms, that they may be captive for an undetermined amount of time. So whether it be a day, whether it be weeks, whatever it is, it's hard to gauge how long it is between their actual attacks, because once they have someone, there's a different period of time they may have each person, so it's difficult to really tell. It's not just like one instance, it's all the other rapes typically. Okay, so getting into serial murder, I'm trying to think of anything else I need to tell you before we get into the different types. A lot of times your serial, say sadistic rapists and your anger retaliation, those types are more likely to fall into murder, especially sadistic type, because the more they torture someone, even though they're raping them, they get to a point where it kind of goes over the line and kills someone. So that's when they, in essence, cross that line of murder. But either way, four types that we're going to talk about are the visionary, mission, and then hedonistic, and then sadistic, or power control, I shouldn't say. Sadistic is part of power control. Sorry. Those are the ones we're going to focus on. Okay. Visionary, mission, hedonistic, power, or power control, right? And within that, you'll find out with hedonistic, there are two different types within. Okay. But first, visionary. So just by using the concept of, if I use the word visionary, what are you thinking some of these people may, what do you think drives them? What do you think makes them commit these crimes? Eli, I think you have something. What do you think?
Like a certain way, like how some, like we're talking about how some rapists are, they have a certain thing they like to say, or a certain area, or like kind of a scripted type thing. They envision what they want and they try to perfect that.
Okay. And some of them do have that aspect of, as far as visionary. All right, so what's another word for if I think I see something, or that's not there? Good.
Fantasy.
Okay, could be fantasy. What's another word as far as with drugs or with mental illness? Hallucinations, right? So that's basically what visionaries are, and I'll pull that up here for you. But they basically, due to a lot of them suffer from schizophrenia, so they either hear voices or see visions. Okay, Ed Gein, though he didn't have a high death count. Okay, not like we really celebrate people kill a lot of people, but the point of it is he's well known. Part of the reason why he's well known, he was a visionary murderer because he would hear voices. He would hear, sometimes it would be his mother, he would think it was. Sometimes he would think it was God telling him that he needed to kill somebody. Or, needless to say, he suffered from schizophrenia and was hearing things. He would see faces in the trees, like in the leaves and stuff like that, out where he lived. So that kind of goes along with visionary. They will, and it's not always God they hear from. Sometimes it's demons. Sometimes it's just whatever is in their mind that they see or hear. That's what visionary is. So Anybody ever hear the whole deal about Dave Berkowitz or Son of Sam? You guys know of him at all? He's the guy. Son of Sam was a nickname that they gave him, basically. Or the 44 Killer was also another one. But David Berkowitz, he was the one that would kind of go up to couples, typically when they were alone, and there was a certain spot or area that, like where these people would kind of park and do their thing, or have their alone time. Okay, so but he would go up to them, in essence, somewhat randomly, and shoot into the car. Typically, actually, at the female, but either way, he would shoot them in the car. And he tried to. He later on admitted that it was just something he made up for attention. But he tried to say, he's like, oh, the neighbor's dog was telling me to kill people. And for a long time, people were like, oh, that's what he was saying. He was hallucinating. But that's really not what it was. I just want to kind of get that out there. He's not a true visionary. It was just simply him trying to make up a story to get something more interesting about him. But another thing about that, like I said, when they hear those voices, they may have a command to kill or cause harm. Okay, they typically view communication, like I said, with God or the devil. And one thing I apologize for not pointing out earlier, as far as overall serial murders, is that there's a difference between a serial murder and a mass murder, right? Like we talked about, the cooling off period is a big issue. Separate killings. So someone who goes and kills, say they're a disgruntled worker, they go to their workplace and shoot people at work, and they go home and kill their spouse or themselves at the end. That's not serial murder. It's just mass murder. Or spree killing can be something that's connected. There's no cooling off period. So that's how it separates between spree, mass, and then serial killing. Okay. You have any questions so far about what we're talking about? Anybody? I don't know how many of you have a whole lot of knowledge of different serial killers, or if you ever heard anything, watched anything, or seen any shows that where they talk about it, and if there's anything that would come to your mind, like, is this person visionary, or but a lot of times this group tends to be, if you want to write this down, I honestly don't remember if I put it on there or not. It tends to be, I probably did. Let's see, hold on. Yep, I did put it on there. They tend to be disorganized. Remember we talked about disorganized asocial offenders? That's what they typically are. They don't plan things out well, and this is kind of because of the whole concept of, there are people who struggle with schizophrenia who have it under control, but these people do not, and they're out of touch with reality. Like it says here, they're truly out of touch with reality. They don't know the difference between what they're seeing and hearing and what reality is. So therefore, if they're in that kind of world, they're not going to be organized anyway. They're just kind of aloof, in essence, okay? And because they are being told to do it, it's a quick kill. It's not something they're doing to enjoy. They're doing it because they're being told to do it in their minds. Okay?
Do these people still get punished, like they get imprisoned, or do they plead insanity, or?
It just depends, honestly. Like, they'll still get some type of, whether it be, whether they're in prison, whether they are put to death. All the above have happened to them. And then some have been basically put in mental institutions. But for the most part, anymore, they'll still go to prison and receive treatment for whatever mental illness they suffer from. But it kind of comes back to, they are out of touch with reality, but they do, and this is kind of you'll learn some other classes like Span of Law. You talk about, does someone know the difference between right and wrong? Okay, they may know the difference between right and wrong. They just feel like they are being told to do this. And since I highly doubt that's really happening, I don't think that God, for example, is telling them to go out and kill people. Since that's a little hard for them to prove. That's the other thing to say, that it's not like they were being forced to do it or didn't have any type of control or decision in the matter. It's just they're choosing to do what they think they hear or see, or what they're being commanded to do. So, and then, like I said, sometimes it will be I'm kind of going backwards in this, but either way, the demand to kill a certain type of person. Sometimes it's a It may be women. It may be, but I don't want to get it too confusing with what we'll talk about with the mission. Okay, but it may be someone of a particular group, as far as culture, race, or whatever. But it's typically just with visionary, it may be like that. However, it's not as common. It's usually what we've already talked about before. It's kind of at random, quick kills, and they are more likely to be disorganized. So whenever you guys do your reports or your presentations, remember there's a part on there that says were they quick kills or slow or whatever it's named. I forget how I worded it, but either way. So that's something else to be aware of. When you research your people, find out. You'll see through, if you do enough research on a person, kind of what they did to their victims, or if they had any other mental health problems that went along with it. You'll be able to get an idea of whether it was quick or not. And that's something I want you to be able to point out, because if you can say, yeah, this person had quick kills, then I'm not saying it's automatic visionary, but it does put you in a category of saying, well, more than likely it could be a visionary killer. So any other questions on that before we move on to the next group? Okay. Next group, mission. This is why I said to be careful. So it says, as you can read here, feels a need to eradicate a certain group of people. All right. So this is different in vision, because in vision, or visionary, I should say, they feel like they're being told, like I said, by God, by a demon, by the Satan, by some other person, being, whatever, that isn't really telling them that. It's just part of their hallucinations or whatever, based on schizophrenia or other mental illnesses, and their own, could be drug-induced issues. Okay, so this is different. Mission is, if I'm in a mission serial murder, I will decide on my own, I think I need to get rid of, say, prostitutes. They're the biggest trouble. They're what's causing the disease problems. They're the ones that are spreading all these, basically whatever issue it is. So, sometimes they've had serial murders who have taken people who have pretended to want to use say a prostitute for business, and then they get them in the car, and then they try to aggressively preach to them, but not in a way that's really trying to do any good for the person. It's more like simply condemning them, and then they'll kill them because they feel like they are a big cause of sin or whatever it is in the world. That's just an example. Okay, but like I said, they feel the need to eradicate a certain group of people, not they're being told to. Okay, conscious. Here's another big difference between mission and visionary. They are fully aware of what they're doing. Like, they are fully aware of their conscious decisions to kill people. They know it's their own. They may feel like, oh, well, based on my upbringing or whatever, I feel like that's terrible. Or what usually happens is they've been offended by someone somewhere in that group. They've either been rejected by people, they've been, or maybe if it was prostitutes, or were prostitutes they were going after, maybe they ended up getting an STD from them, or something that they contribute to that lifestyle. That's the reason why. It has nothing to do with mental health saying, oh, I'm being told to do it. Okay? That completely touch with reality, kind of. So it's still quick kills. So both mission and vision, if you want to put them together in that group, you have to make sure we've already separated them as far as being fully aware of what they're doing and knowing that they're the ones deciding to do it. But both of them have quick kills. They're not, because for them it's a mission, they're not getting enjoyment out of killing the people, the victims. They just understand it in their minds. They think that they're on a mission to get rid of that group, because that group is causing problems in society or to them as individuals. Okay? Does the difference make sense, or you guys have questions about it? And here's another big difference between, I hope this is the last, yeah, it was the last one. So another big difference between visionary and mission is that, so we said that visionaries were much more likely to be disorganized. In fact, almost all of them are. Whereas mission, they can be disorganized, but the majority of them are organized because they're in the right mind. They come up with a plan about who they're going to target, and then they execute that plan. So that's more along the lines of organized, essentially, right? So, is there any confusion between the two? I can try to help out. Sure. Nobody? Austin, you good? As far as understand? Hannah? I won't ask everybody, but okay. All right. So if we're good with mission and visionary, let's move on to a separate group, which is probably more so. This is where a lot of the original concepts of serial killers came from. As far as, they used to call them, the lust kills or lust and thrill kill type of things. Okay, we still have that as a category, but it's not all of them. But this is kind of where it started from, and it got its own category now. But at one time, it was basically the main focus. So hedonistic, we have your lust or thrill killer, right? We'll get into some of that. And we also have comfort oriented, which we'll get into after this. But either way, for the hedonistic type, this is the connection between personal violence, sexual gratification. So once again, we talked about a little bit about this with rapists. They weren't called hedonistic, but they might have been called, sadistic or sadist in essence. But what we're talking about now is there is a connection between the violence and some form of sexual gratification, even though it's going to end in murder. So there was Andrei Chikatilo. He was Russian, lived in Rostov. Okay, he, for example, his story kind of goes back a ways when he was younger. Had some problems. Was different. Okay, but he tried to be intimate when he was. Let's see. I think he tried to be sexual. Let's just say all the way up through to the time he was 18. He tried, and it failed. Even I think one time he was 18 with a younger girl. I say 15, whatever. Didn't work for him physically and whatever. Okay, did not have a good experience with that. Later on, he became a teacher, and while he was teaching, he tried to have a sexual interaction with a 15-year-old student. Did not function properly, but he did. Another thing he found out or discovered while kind of exploring some of these things was he got excited when, I think they were in a pool one time, and the victim was kind of struggling to try to get away from it. He got more excited by that than by the actual, potential intimate side of the sexual, everything sexual. He got excited because the person was, in essence, fighting back. So later on, he did get into a relationship. They tried to have sex. It didn't work for him very well. They did have, I think they had a kid, and this is how they, not to be gross, this is how they had the child. He could not perform sexually, so what they would do is either he would masturbate or, in essence, he would ejaculate, and then he or she, he or his wife, whatever, would take that and insert it into her vagina that way. So yeah, that marriage didn't really work out real well for him. Long story short, he ends up, he's obviously an adult by now. He ends up waiting on younger people, usually younger, say kids, whatever, that would be near, I believe it was a train station, and he would get them. I don't remember how he always, because it was different ways, how he got them to be alone with him. But he would take them away from the train station out to these woods that were by the train station, and then he would. I say kids; they were like young women typically, okay, or younger women. And then he would take them out, and what he would get excited by was the stabbing of them. So while he was, and it's called Pickering, I believe, to where you get excited by the penetration of an object other than yourself into the person. Not necessarily into a sexual organ, it can be, but it is, he got excited by using the knife and stabbing people because in his mind, the knife was acting like his penis and that was the only way he could actually function. So when he would get stabbing them and the stabbing them and the blood and everything else actually got him aroused. Yep. So, but he ended up killing them, obviously, in the process. It's a little hard to keep stabbing someone and not kill them. So, that's welcome to a world of Andrei Chikatilo. He also, they feel like when he was young, I forgot to mention, like when he was real young, in Russia, they were having basically a famine, and there was a deal where there was a legitimate threat at times where people were worried about being cannibalized, and his mother, they don't know whether it was real or not, or his mom made it up to scare him, but their brother went missing, and he never did see his brother again. But she told Andrea that his brother had been taken and eaten by other people, so that was to keep him in line, basically. But needless to say, yeah, that was the environment he grew up in. But then later on, he didn't cannibalize like, say, Jeffrey Dahmer did, but he did occasionally eviscerate different parts or take different organs out or chew on, in essence, some of his victims, but not truly cannibalize them. So either way, that's more so what we're talking about with, like I said, the connection between the personal violence, sexual gratification. The killing itself is what is erotic to them. So think about this. We will get into some different types later. Understand that the hedonistic says it's not the dying process. It's the process of killing someone. So if I can draw out the killing of it, I don't want it to. So we'll get here in a little bit. You'll see that they will not be quick kills. I'm going to go ahead and bring some of these out here. Okay, so I'll go ahead and talk about the slow kills since I just mentioned it. The reason for that is because if they're finding it erotic to kill someone, the process of killing someone, whether it be with a knife, whether it be strangulation, or whatever, if that's what is erotic for them, and that's what's getting them excited, they're going to want to prolong that, right? So that's why they like the slower kills. They want to make that person, not because they want to see that person suffer. That's not necessarily what it is. That's more your sadistic type of stuff. But we're talking about hedonistic. It's the process of killing somebody that they enjoy. It's, part of it may be the fear that they elicit in someone, but it's just there's something that they enjoy about knowing that they can have control over the life and death of somebody, and the fact that but I don't want to get over into power control too much. But just simply the blood sometimes gets people aroused. Sometimes it's just the simple fact that they like to see someone dying, and there's that, like I said, that physical aspect of it, that violence to it is what is driving that arousal. So they're going to want to keep that going. And then what usually happens is obviously you can only kill or take the process of killing someone so far, and eventually the person dies, right? So that's what happens. They just want to keep going until the person's dead, and then typically that's the end of it for them. Okay, there are other groups that may go back and say do sexual things with the dead bodies or whatever. But that's something else we'll talk about later. But either way, so very process oriented or focused, as you can read there. So if there's a way they like to kill, like I said, if there's a weapon they choose to use or a method, definitely they'll stick with that. Okay, sharp object, knives, whatever. If they, like I said, if they want to use ropes to strangle or choke someone, that's their thing. Zero, shouldn't say zero. You don't have as much mental illness with them. They have obviously something a little messed up about them, but they don't have what you and I would consider diagnosed problems, as far as they may have social, let's see, what is it? Why can't I think of it right now? But anyway, it's basically a disorder where you antisocial disorder. Okay, they definitely have that, but it's not a mental illness like I've mentioned before with visionaries having schizophrenia or something that's altering their reality entirely. It's simply there is something. They may have something wrong, like a damage to the brain. They may have something else, but they don't have what you and I will deem to be a severe mental illness that's causing them to do this. Right? So yeah, these are definitely types that if they get caught and they will be convicted and they will be sent to prison. There's no like, let's get them some mental help. It's just let's lock this person away or put a needle in their arm or whatever the case is. Uh, that's essentially what we're looking at. Um, as you can read there, I don't want to have to repeat all that stuff, but yeah, like when the victim's helpless. Let's see if there's anything else that I haven't touched on yet. So that's your lust, thrill, kill. Still hedonistic, right? Because we're going to get to another category of hedonistic next. But so I think lust, thrill, kill is, like I said, the one that draws people in. Like, oh, that's strange. Okay, well, yeah, it is. But there's a sexual component to their to what they do. Okay, they're not after sex per se, but they do get sexual gratification from it. Okay, questions about lust, thrill, kill type? Okay, they can participate. And here's some additional information. Same group, right? Um, and this is where it gets a little bit unique and strange compared to some of the stuff. So, because they do plan it out, they may dismember the body, mutilate the body, whatever you want to say. And the other thing is, it's a continuation. So if they enjoy the killing process, sometimes they also enjoy just the continuation of degrading the body itself. Okay, so like I said, that's their dismemberment. Um, Anybody here on a group doing Dahmer? Okay, I don't want to run help you out too much, but yeah, he would. I would feel like he definitely fits into this category because he did all the things we talked about. Dismemberment, he would have some of that as well as some cannibalism. He also did participate in necrophilia, which, by the way, anybody know what that is? I think I remind you guys. Think about Eli. What is it?
Oh, I have to.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, you raise your hand.
It's like, not like sexual activities, like a dead person.
Yep, that's all. I say that's all. But yes, that is what it is. It doesn't always have to be sex, even though it can be. But yeah, it'd be sexual activity with a dead body or parts of the body. You had, for example, there's a number of them. Let's see, Ted Bundy even did it. But since we're on or talked about Dahmer a little bit, he would go back and still do sexual things with the dead, his victims, basically. Thing. So sometimes that might include some of them going back to wherever they had the body, if they dumped it or anything like that, and actually, if you and I want to call it, or they call it, having sex with it. But either way, they may have sex or whatever you would like to refer to that as, besides necrophilia. And it could be vaginally, anally, whatever, they can do that. Or if there were parts to the body, they would do that. Another one that had been done, I believe I'm correct on this, Ed Kemper had at different times, not on every single victim, but there were some, like if the head was removed, he may basically grab the head and act like it was performing oral on him. Okay? But yep, some strange stuff, right? Although, in case you've never seen a picture or know much about Ed Kemper, he was a big dude. I gotta remember if he's still alive or not. I mean, he's still around, or had been around for a long time, but I didn't know recently if he had died or not. But yeah, I think he's like 6'8" or something like that, and just a big built guy. Actually really, really intelligent, but obviously has some issues. Okay, so but yeah, that's what we're talking about necrophilia. That can happen with hedonistic Because what hedonism, if you look at hedonism in terms of like, say, ethics and all that stuff, it's basically just seeking pleasure. Okay, that's what it is. So that's what they're seeking, that pleasure of. And I remember how I said it was gratifying, sexually gratifying for them to kill someone. That's how it gets into. That's why it's called hedonism, because they're getting some pleasure from that. But yeah, definitely into torture. We don't call, for example, there's not a real category that we call sadistic serial murderers, but they are in here. They are basically under hedonistic because they do, some of them, not all of them, do torture and mutilation and stuff like that. Okay. Definitely like the domination and fear activities. That's BTK. He enjoyed that. That's why he did the whole either rope or sometimes bags over people's head and basically would strangle them until right before they passed out, or maybe they did pass out and they let them come back, like revive them or let them regain consciousness, and then continue on that same process. But yeah, that's what we're talking about with hedonistic lust thrill type. Okay, good.
My question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
You said that they get pleasure out of just the killing in general. So like, why do they do the fear stuff if they don't get pleasure out of it?
Because for them, I guess it's a part of the process of domination and saying, well, if someone, it's almost like an indication that person knows that they're the dying process, and so that domination and fear aspect is like, oh, that person is feeling that way because I'm the one who's causing their death, and they know death is imminent, basically. And so I think that's, if I had to put myself in their mind, which is kind of scary, yes, that's how they see it. So, good question, though. All right, so this one's a little bit different, comfort-oriented. Anybody ever heard of Eileen Wuornos? Eileen Wuornos they considered her to be a serial murderer. I mean, yes, she did eventually kill people, but she actually started off as far as robbery. Her and her, I believe she was lesbian, or at least was at the time. Her and her partner decided to, so first of all, she started off as a prostitute. That they're known as parking lot lizards, so they would hang out at, like, say, truck stops or other places like that where typically truckers would come and rest or, whatever, right? Or apparently get entertainment. But either way, so this is where it's strange or different how she starts out is, and I'll get into comfort-oriented specifically in here in a little bit, but she used to basically, she would obviously be a prostitute. She would get the truckers to where they were somewhat alone, and then about the time that she's like, oh, in essence, making them think that something's going to happen. Granted, for a while she did do that stuff, but she got to the point where what she would do is she'd get to that point, and whenever when the victim was in essence vulnerable or in a situation where he wasn't paying enough attention, she would take I believe it was a 22 revolver, at least I know it was a 22 handgun, but I thought it was a revolver, and shoot them. And then, but she didn't shoot him because that was her main goal. She basically shot him because that would get rid of a witness. The main goal behind what she was doing was to rob them. She was taking their money or whatever they had on them. That's what they were doing. That was the original thing, and then it became like to where they were just basically killing. But it started off, the biggest focus was getting money out of it. So, which is part of core-oriented. No sexual gratification comes from comfort-oriented hedonistic. And the reason why it's still hedonistic, because people are like, oh, isn't hedonism attached to, say, sexual gratification? No, hedonism is attached to pleasure. And for some people, getting pleasure is, say, having money. Or, like, for example, Mr. Switzer, earlier in the year, he said, hey, what are things that people want? He said, money, fame, whatever, right? So that's part of the concept is some people feel like if I have more money, that will bring me more pleasure. Okay? So that's where comfort-oriented comes in. It's no sexual gratification, kills for personal gain. I wish I could remember the guy's last name, Billy something. I'll He was basically started off as a con artist, and started off to where he would take advantage of elderly people, in essence, be their caretaker for a little while, and start getting their checks, right? If they weren't really needing the money or somehow he could get by with it, he would, in essence, cash their checks, say he was going to put it in their account, but he also had access to that account, so he'd just withdraw all their money. That worked for a while, but then he ended up, then he started looking for people to start taking care of, but then he also realized it's a lot easier to just kill the victim and then continue to get those checks and not have to feel like he's actually, that he's going to have a lower likelihood of someone complaining, whether it be a family member. The key is to pick someone who doesn't have any family left, basically. But either way, there's not going to be someone around to try to question what he's doing. It's just, oh, well, I'm still the, for lack of better terms, like a POA, so power of attorney, or you wouldn't be executive because that's usually after someone dies. But power of attorney can be, you can have a joint account with somebody. So therefore, if Austin, if he's the elderly person I'm picking in this case, because I'm the bill guy, right? I pick him. I figure I'm just gonna kill Austin, but the checks are still gonna keep rolling in. I still have access to that money because I can still put it in his account, right? So that's what he would do, multiple places, and then he ended up putting the bodies in different barrels. I think his barrels were, I can't remember if they were metal barrels at the time or if they were plastic. But either way, those big, like 50-gallon barrels, he'd put bodies in there. Some of them he tried to put chemical in there and turn them into sludge, but some of them were just put in the barrels and put in like a shed out away from where most people would ever go or smell it, or whatever. But eventually he got caught because I forget how they originally got to his house, but then once they got to the property and they could basically smell something that smelled really dead, and they go check it out and find out he had some people hanging out in 50-gallon drums. So, all right. But back to the overall hedonistic kill for personal gain. Could be money, could be you name it. But a lot of times it's for money. But anything that will allow you to gain what you want out of it. You don't typically, if you have someone who is I hate to say this, but a serial marrier, if they marry multiple people intentionally with the idea of killing them to get their money from their death, if they do it enough and someone's stupid enough to keep marrying them, then that can actually be, technically that could be a comfort-oriented serial killer. So we have that. We have Kuklinski, who was a hitman, and that's why he was considered comfort-oriented, even though he would kill people, didn't really have any remorse for it, but he would kill them, and then later on, that's just what got him caught. He started working with another guy, and the other guy was dismembering the bodies and screwed up. I say screwed up. It's not like I wanted him to keep going and not get caught, but I'm saying that's where Kuklinski got caught, was the guy that he was working with later wasn't as careful about what he was doing, okay? But he was doing the murdering. Though he was truly a serial killer, he was doing it for monetary purposes. He was getting paid by, in essence, the mob to go kill people, right? So he killed a few on his own just because, but for the most part, his were all for money. John, I said Bill. John Robinson was the one that I was trying to think of. He was the one I was describing with the elderly people. Eileen Warnios, yeah, look up pictures of her. She's a winner.
She's dead.
If you ever, huh?
She's dead.
She's dead. Yeah. Or
No, I'm saying she's ugly.
well, hey, everybody's got their own thing, man. You may think she's beautiful.
I was just asking.
Hey, you can look it up sometime. It's all good. Yeah, if you like that type, I'm guessing if you like that type, you won't have a whole lot of competition to it's not like you're gonna have to win her over a whole lot against other people. but she's dead now. So you have to find someone else that looks like her. Yeah, there you go. That's what you say to people. Like, if you have people trying to help hook you up with somebody, or you use online dating or whatever, I'm looking for a modern day Eileen Wuornos. If you can, that would be awesome. So, all right, so let's move on. That's all. Seriously, that's all comfort oriented is. That's why I said it. You guys will probably get that pretty easily. It's just typically for money. I'm going to take this out so I can see how we're doing on time. Okay. Yeah. Don't worry, we're almost there. All right, power control should be pretty obvious in this case. Sexual gratification from, here's the difference between the hedonistic lust thrill that said they got the thrill, or they get their sexual gratification and arousal from the killing process. Power control simply gets there from total domination of somebody. That's their goal. Their goal is to completely dominate. The killing part doesn't excite them as much as simply knowing that they have total control and domination over another person. Okay? Could be a man, a woman, does not matter, but that's power control. Like I said, similar to hedonistic in a lot of ways, so you got to be careful to distinguish the two. But here's another big difference. For as crazy as you would think, like, well, obviously someone who was a lust thrill had to be a little different too. The power control has a much higher tendency to be sociopathic, right? So sociopaths they can develop friendships, relationships, but sometimes they just choose not to. They tend to not have the emotional connection with people. Like, they don't experience fear the same way. They're similar to psychopaths, but like a step down from psychopaths. But they tend to not experience fear or remorse like normal people would. So that's kind of where that's why and how they can actually, they're all about this domination thing. They don't experience remorse or empathy for other people. So for them, it makes it so much easier and enjoyable to just have this sheer idea of total domination over someone, even if they're harming that person, scaring them, causing pain, whatever the case is. They like to be hands-on, for example. So that was one thing. I probably should have mentioned with the hedonistic lust thrill kill. They may use knives, they may use other devices that can be held in the hand. That's fine. But when you're talking about power control, they actually like to use their own hands to cause the suffering and because what better way to show dominance than to show basically someone, I can dominate you with my bare hands. I don't need to have other weapons or tools or whatever to do it. I'm just going to, for lack of better terms, manhandle you, right? They somehow don't have mental illnesses. Like I said, sociopaths, their brains may not be, they may be malformed in essence because their amygdalas may be smaller, which affects the fear response. They may have lower impulse control because the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed or damaged, right? But they are still, in terms of mental illnesses, still not mentally ill with, they're not having hallucinations. They're not having anything that's affecting them, taking them out of reality. Okay? That makes them worse, I guess, in my opinion. Once again, process focused, just like we had with the lust thrill kill types of the hedonism. They have their processes. They find out what works, or they find out what they enjoy and stick with that stuff. So everybody's a little bit different, but nonetheless, they focus on what works for them, what form of domination works for them, how they want to dominate somebody. Is there a sexual component to it? Whether it be the raping aspect of it, or is it something else that they do to dominate someone without actually being sexual, but it still gives them sexual gratification? So instead of raping someone, for example, there are some power controls that don't actually rape the victim. They may they may get aroused by the power that they are exerting over someone enough to the point where they, rather than having sex, they will basically ejaculate onto the person or around the victim. But either way, there's not actual sexual contact that has to occur. It can, but it doesn't have to. It's just all about, like I said, total domination of somebody. And I already mentioned this before, prefers when it comes time to kill somebody, since it's serial murder, they like to be hands-on, choking, beating someone to death, whatever the case is. But a lot of times, more than likely with power control, they tend to choke or strangle their victims. Okay, so that's something. Another key difference is if you ever come across if you're doing an investigation, and you're like, oh wow, it's kind of close to say the difference between a hedonistic lust thrill versus power control, and you're starting to notice that these deaths are actually being caused by, or the cause of death is strangulation a lot of times, or you can tell there's a lot of bruising and stuff from hands, not from other weapons being used, objects, then you may want to look in the power control aspect of of that category. Okay. Let's see. Like I kind of already alluded to that. Okay, yeah, strangling is ideal because for as terrible as it sounds, what more personal way do you have to dominate someone besides using your own bare hands, but on their own, throat or whatever way you choose, which is usually the way people strangle. Okay, but what better way to show total dominance to where you are more than likely either have a lot of them, they may have their victims against the wall or whatever, but typically it's going to be on the ground, in essence, a way to where they are on top of their victims. What better way to show dominance than being on top of someone and strangulation to where you're using your own hands to strangle them? Or even if you're not using your own hands, you're using an object you're holding in your hands and you are providing the force that's killing them.